Welcome to the Bible Made Clear. I'm here today with Herb Butterworth, my old friend, and as you can see, he's in a little bit of a rustic area. He is at the Sugar Shack, which is a shack on his property where he is making maple syrup. So, welcome, Herb.
Thank you very much, Scott.
I think that it's interesting that Herb's signal can reach out to the Sugar Shack, so he may be more comfortable there than any other place. But maybe I should have worn my cowboy hat, Herb. We could have
Yeah,
we could have had the dynamic duo here. But
yeah, it's been very fitting.
so, but we figured today that we would discuss predictive prophecy. Last week, I did a video on the value of it, the importance of it, because it is so significant. And so we'll just we're going to have a conversation with Herb. We'll see where it goes, and hopefully you can benefit from some of our conversation. So, Herb, what did you think about the presentation? Probably a loaded question there, right?
I love the presentation, and I think I want more people to be aware of these things. They're so important. Um, you hear people talking about people that are pretty well educated, and they would say things and do say things like the Bible is a bunch of silly stories put together by uneducated men from antiquity, and it really doesn't have any relevance in today's world. And I think that is just an outrageous claim to say something like that. And clearly, in making a claim like that, they have never really read the Bible or certainly have not studied it. And I think some of the things that, as you pointed out in your previous video about prophecy, it's mind blowing. And I think these are the things that we can look at. And that's just one aspect, Scott. You brought up one point about prophecy, and there were many other ways to look at this and paths to go on. But it tells you that the Bible is supernatural. It was not written by mere men. Men cannot have any ability to prophesy like that or to see the future. This had to come from something else. And I think that's abundantly clear. And it's there for anybody that wants to look into it. Certainly, um, just having something like this suggested, it should make people want to at least look into it. And that's what all that you would ask, I'm sure, and certainly all that I would ask is that look into this. And if you're going to discount the Bible, do it with an education. Do it knowing what you're talking about, and give it a chance. Read it and see what you think. That's all we can say. It's to me, it's just an incredible work, and I'm sure that there are many out there that really haven't given it much thought. But if they dug in, they would just be blown away by it. And that's what we're hoping to do, to encourage people to do just that.
I think one of the things that is important that we have a tendency to, overlook is we present the Bible, we talk about its value, we talk about certainly the prophetic aspect, which really almost puts it in its own class. Um, there's there's the comparative, or actually the contrasting aspect of prophecy to, now you have to ask the question, well, like, what else is close to it? And I think that people often will discount the Bible, but then the next question is, well, that's fine if you want to say, well, I don't believe any of that. I would ask, why don't you believe it? And then what would you put in place of it? In other words, what do you believe? Now, we know that most people aren't driving hard to try to discover what the truth is. I think it's like Pascal said, most people, they want to live in a certain way and then just find a truth to back it up so that they can support what they're doing. And I think most people do that anyways. When I was consulting at Northeastern University in the 90s, and talking to different students that used to work for the academic computing department. I'd stay after work and talk to them. They'd test out their religion classes on me and all that. It was kind of like try to stump the pastor. And, walking out to my car one night, nice kid. They were all nice kids. And after I had shared Christ with them, he said, Scott, I think people, now he wasn't a Christian. He said, I think people do what they want to do, believe what they want to believe, and then they search for something that matches it so that they can say, well, I kind of fall into this bucket, which was pretty insightful for a kid that's like, 19, 20 years old, right? So, yeah. and I think people tend to do that. But look, whether you're young or whether you're older, I think the important question needs to be, if you're going to take the Bible and put it aside and say, I don't think it has relevance, then the burden really is on the person then to come up with something that is relevant. And certainly comparatively to any other religion or group, like I talked about in the presentation, we have just a chain of prophecy, one building upon another, adding to it, making it more complex. Just talking about Jesus Christ alone in his first coming. So, I went through the information in Peter Stoner's book, Science Speaks, and all that, for just 8 prophecies. But, when you have all these prophecies, and these prophecies anticipate the arrival of some figure, and then you have the figure arrive, they're validated by what was previously written characteristically about them and what they would do. So then the prophecy that's written ahead of time saying that they would do this and do that, then they do that, on multiple occasions. So now they're confirmed as being the one that was discussed ahead of time. After, at a certain point, the mathematical possibility of that happening with anybody is so astronomical. It's, we're not dealing in the realm of possibility really at that point. So then the comparative challenge now is that, okay, if you're going to reject Christ, after all that was written ahead of time that can't be changed, he fulfills that. Right? And then you have the evidence of him dying, rising from the dead, conquering death, ascending into heaven. Well, what comes next? Because even among the only real options for theistic gods, because obviously pantheism and, polytheism and everything else, none of that makes any logical sense, nor does it answer the actual questions of how we got here and what kind of God would create us. But then within the theistic gods, you're really just dealing with Judaism and Christianity, which, the miraculous aspect has moved from Judaism to Christianity, and the power of God is now demonstrated in Christianity, moving over with Jesus and the apostles. So you have the anticipation within the Old Testament, the confirmation fulfillment in the New Testament, but the only other one that comes along that is dealing with a theistic God is Islam, and Islam comes, 600 years after Christ. So if you're 600 years after the event, and then you ask the question, okay, so was Muhammad anticipated? No. Was there any prophecies about him? No. When he arrived, was he validated by miracles? No. Did he confirm anything that he was supposed to fulfill? No. So he's just a guy that showed up. Well, anybody can show up, okay? And then, you get the same with Joseph Smith and the Mormons in 1830. He's a guy that just shows up. No anticipation, no validation, no confirmation. Charles Taze Russell with the Jehovah's Witnesses, no anticipation, no validation, no confirmation. L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, no anticipation, no validation, no confirmation. So you can go like this even through all the pantheistic religions on the globe and any other religion, New Age, anybody that exists anywhere in human history. And you get nothing that's even in the same galaxy as the predictive prophecy in the Bible. So what's the alternative, really? I mean, if somebody says, well, I don't accept the Bible, what could possibly be the alternative?
I think that Christianity, and I believe this with all my heart, that it's the only so-called religion that really has any logical explanation behind it. I think that people make a mistake when they throw it into a group with other religions and just say, it's just another one of those. It most certainly is not. You pointed out how people, they want to live the way they want to live, and they want to do the things they want to do, so they pick something that goes along with their lifestyle. And I think thus the birth of many new faiths, I guess you'd say. But as you pointed out, none of them have any backing behind them. No history behind them, no predictive power behind them, no miracles behind them, and it just comes down to they were the thoughts of men, or a specific man had an idea, and some people liked it, and this guy was a good presenter maybe, and he convinced these people, and they decided to go along and follow it. Besides the fact they probably can do the things that they want to do and not have to feel any remorse for doing these things. Christianity, on the other hand, it has all these predictive elements to it. From the very beginning, we start out in Genesis, and things are predicted. Abraham was given promises that were fulfilled, and we see that. And we see many prophetic statements made that were fulfilled. We know that they were fulfilled. There's proof there. We know the big one, as you already mentioned, the coming Messiah, that there would be a way for us to be redeemed. We know the fall of man, what happened there, and immediately God went into the process of redeeming us all, and he had a plan already in place. And we saw that plan come to fruition in Jesus Christ, who was predicted many years before his birth. And there he was. And the prophecies about him were so specific, and these very things happened. And there's nothing else like it. There's no other religion like it. And we can look outside of the Bible, and we see scientific evidence that verifies it. We see archaeological evidence that verifies it. It's just, we can go on and on and on. There's nothing like it. And I think what's unfortunate, and I want to make this point, what's unfortunate is that, as I already said, people want to do the things that they want to do and live the way that they want to live. What they don't understand is that we have a loving God. He's the Christian God. And he puts forth these commandments, the law, so to speak. I think that people don't understand that if they follow his precepts, if they stay and live the way or the life that he desires for each one of us to live, it's the happiest, most fulfilled life you can possibly have. People don't see that. They go ahead and they do the things that they want to do. And I'm surrounded by people, and I'm sure you are too, that don't believe that's true, and they go ahead and they live the way that they want to live, and they just end up in this horrible misery because they're doing things their way and they're having things the way they want, and it's just miserable for them. Yet they will not relinquish that. They stay on their path. And I think that's the biggest misunderstanding. People just don't know. If they live the way the Lord wanted them to live, they would be so much happier, so much better off. And they're blind to it. And it's frustrating for all of us to see this.
Well, and and I think that there's, to add to that, even if a person is in the midst of persecution or trial, I think the peace that Jesus provides also gives consolation and an inward blessing and benefit that otherwise can't be experienced. Because there are in our country it's a little different. I mean, we're kind of like living in Disneyland here, though Disneyland's going a little bit crazy, right? And
Yeah.
but as we lose more and more freedoms as Americans, it's not going to be as kind to us, I guess. And but there are Christians in other areas of the world that don't enjoy, I guess, the outward benefits and blessings that we enjoy here in our country. But as they're under persecution and really kind of going through terrible difficulty, they at least have in their hearts a joy and a peace. At least there is that potential because of their relationship with Christ, and that there is something beyond this world that is going to eventually occur realistically with all of us. And but they know that they're going to be with Christ for eternity. The problem is that those that are not going to be with Christ, they're going to perish. And like Paul says, it's an eternal destruction that they're going towards. So a lot weighs in the balance, not only what can happen on the inside of our life now, that benefit, but also in eternity. In other words, you don't get a do-over. I mean, you're either going to heaven or you're going to hell, and that is an important aspect, because I think God has provided the evidence for people to be able to recognize the fact that, even though we have all the love and the grace that God has provided through Christ, the mere fact that Jesus talked about heaven and hell, and those are going to be the destination of every single human being, it's important that we understand that he's offering the love, the grace, the consolation, the blessing, the inward peace, right? He said, my peace I leave with you, not as the world gives do I give to you. So he's providing all these things as a benefit now and for eternity, where there could be people that are unsaved that live a good life. I got friends that aren't Christians, they're not interested, but they're good people. I mean, they live better than some Christians I know. They're good dads, they're good family men, they're moral guys, but they're not saved, they're not interested, and but it breaks my heart. They're going to end up in hell if they continue on that path. Though in this life they're content and happy with what they got. They're not in misery, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah. That reminds me, we had a conversation a few days ago or a week ago or something. We were talking about that, and I think the biggest thing right now with people is their apathy. They don't want to be bothered with it. They have their own things going on. They're dealing with the kids, and dealing with different issues in their lives, on the job, things like that, and they're just focused on that, and they don't want to think about these things. They just can't be bothered with it. It's just too much of a hassle for them, and I don't think that they really make the connection there, that this is the most important thing in their lives for them to contemplate and make their decision. They just don't. They don't bother.
Yeah,
it's set.
Yeah, we had talked about that, and
Yeah.
you said you thought the biggest problem with people in general, even among Christians, is apathy. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't care, and I don't want to know, and just leave me alone. I'm kind of doing my own thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think the culture lends to that. Um, you know, uh, we're kind of talking about it in class today, and one of the benefits of technology is that you can find out. I mean, goodness, actually, you get too much information. Something happens on the other side of the world, and you're getting it in 2 seconds, and you're getting it from multiple sources, and something else happens there, something else happens, in a state here or there, and it's like, if you were going to try to track everything that's happening on a global basis, you'd be overwhelmed, and
Yeah.
but when we were growing up, I mean, I'm dating myself, but I graduated high school in '75, and by the end of that year, I was in the Army. So, um, you get no technology. Really, you get, you get dial phones, black and white TV or whatever. Some people had color that had more money, but it's just it was a whole different world. There's only a few channels, even when you get into the '80s. But because of the lack of technology, people had to deal with things differently, and you you had to pursue things for information, and you didn't get overwhelmed with information. Like, you weren't kind of bombarded with stuff. The information came in almost at a snail's pace, so you could think about it. You could maybe think deeply about it, maybe not think deeply about everything, but about a lot of things. The kids growing up now, they don't seem to have the time to think really below the surface on almost anything, because it's just even in school they're just overwhelmed with it's just like they're choking down the information that's flooded at them. And hey, listen, I got to be careful in Bible class not to do that, because there's just so much to try to teach them, and you only have so much time, so I just think that the culture, the way it's developed, has benefits, but it's also got I think it has a heavy downside. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's very difficult to stay focused on one specific topic that you're trying to look into. And I remember, back in the '70s and in the '80s, and I would have a certain subject matter in mind, and I'd want to look into it, and I'd have to get various books and whatever, and that's how I would do it. Well, the books that I would get and whatever information I would get was specific to that certain topic that I was researching and wanted to know more about. Today, I'll have something in mind and I want to look into it a little bit more, so I'll go onto the internet and I'll look something up, and then as I'm looking it up, trying to get into it, I'll get sidetracked by something else that was there that popped up or whatever, and I'll say, oh, that looks interesting, I'll look into that, and I never really get to where I wanted to go. I'm on these rabbit holes all over the place. And it's a lot harder now. You have to be very, very disciplined now in order to complete the task that you originally set out to do.
Well, and I think, but among the younger generation, I think it's hard for them to have that discipline, because they're trained.
Yeah.
They're trained against it, and so then you put them in church, and at least here. I mean, look, you were here for how many years were you here? I mean, oh my gosh,
I don't know, 15 or 20 or
something like that.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
but we're plotting our way through the Bible from the pulpit on Sundays and Wednesdays, and it's verse by verse. So, hey, some verses are more exciting than others, but you're learning the Bible, and I think people that have been here for a long time, like you, even though you moved away but I'm almost to the place of forgiving you. And
Yeah,
but
I appreciate it.
yeah, you moved away,
Yeah,
but you keep looking for the same thing even up in Maine. You
yeah,
know, you
yeah,
because you get used to being able to listen through like a long Bible study. And a lot of people can't tolerate that. A lot of churches, prefer either kind of the hot button sermons, something from the previous week that's, in the news or exciting, or, they're just kind of stuck on topics, which topics are, on a weekly basis, they're more interesting than plodding through verse by verse. The problem is, you know, at the end of the day, people are not necessarily learning the Bible. If they're learning the Bible on their own and they're disciplined, which not a lot are, and then they come to church for a topical sermon, they'll probably be fine. But if they are kind of going with the church through the Bible, though it takes longer and it's not as exciting, they're actually learning the Bible. It gives them more of a deep appreciation for the Bible. It also allows them to see everything in context. So even though, like we're talking about predictive prophecy, as the prophecy comes up in its kind of natural setting in the Old Testament, and then, it may be referenced over to how it was fulfilled in the New Testament or vice versa. They see it fulfilled in the New Testament, and then you go back to the Old and say, well, this is where it came from. You keep connecting pieces together little by little, and it's a slower process, but it's a deeper process, and it's a more lasting process because you're actually learning the book. I mean, we've had people come here that have been Christians for 10, 15 years, and sadly, they actually don't know the Bible. Now, they know a lot of verses. They know a lot of kind of Bible stories. They're well versed at certain topics of the Bible, like they'll know about different kind of topical issues in the Bible, but yet the Bible itself is still like how it's coordinated and set in its context for each book. It's a mystery to them. And that's because they actually weren't taught the Bible. They were taught stuff about the Bible or different aspects of topics. And I think when you get, and I know this is kind of the long way around, but when you get to the place where you're teaching through the Bible in this kind of slower fashion, if you can get people used to it, then you can get them also used to doing a little bit more thinking, because the other way, it's just the quick information, it's the kind of the exciting, fast topic, but you're really catering to what the culture is already doing to them. Do you know what I mean by that?
I know what you mean, and I think that's so important, and that's one of the things that I found attractive of Calvary Chapel is the verse by verse, and I love going in there, and that's what we do every Sunday. We go verse by verse, and when I moved up here, I found another Calvary Chapel that does exactly the same thing. It's just a Calvary Chapel thing. That's how they do it, and I think it's wonderful because you can read and by yourself, and that's wonderful, and you get a lot out of it. Sure you do, but I like going over it in church and having a pastor that knows the Bible well, and having somebody that knows the Bible better than you do, at least in my case. It's very helpful, and I love having their insight and what they can bring out in it. Now, aside from that, the Bible is such a book that every time you read it, you can read, Ephesians, you can read it, 25 times. And on the 26th time, you read it again, you're going to find something in there that you missed, or, it's something new to you. It's presented just in your own reading, but something that you get out of it that you didn't get before. It's incredible. I've never known any other book that was like that. But yeah, and it's wonderful hearing, different people give their takes on it, because there's so much to be gained from it. and spending time in it. And speaking of the Bible as reading it and understanding it and studying it, it took me quite a while to really, you read a book, you read some verses, whatever, and that's fine. That's great. There's a lot in that. But there's an overall theme in the Bible that I think a lot of people are missing. It's from Genesis to Revelation, it's all interconnected. There's a theme that goes throughout the whole thing that might take a while to pick up on, but when you do, to me, it was just so, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say mind-blowing to me. The fall, right at the beginning in Genesis, in the process of restoration that's brought through the whole Bible, and the nature of God that's conveyed through the whole Bible. It doesn't change. God never changes. Make no mistake, there's not a nice God in the New Testament and a mean God in the Old Testament. It's the same God right throughout. And he wants everyone to come to him. It's his desire for all of us to come to him, and he's providing a way. He gave the ultimate sacrifice in order to do that. And to see how that's all connected together by all these different books, all these different authors that are portraying the same character, the same nature of God. To me, I know we talked about this before, but to me, to see that happen over the millennia with all these different authors and to be so consistent throughout, that's not the act of man. It can't be. That's a supernatural act. This is the Word of God. This is presented by God using men to pen this down. He's giving them what to write. And to me, it's just so clear. It's undeniable. And that's the beautiful thing about the Bible.
Well, and yeah, we had talked about that you can't really sit people in the same room and play the telephone game and get the same message.
No.
Now, isn't it interesting? People say the Bible's like the telephone game. Somebody translated from somebody that translated from somebody and all this stuff. And sure, by the time we get the Bible now, it was one person passed it on to the next. And since playing the telephone game around the room, you can't really stay with the same message. So how could we ever know what the Bible taught? Well, obviously.
Well, I think that's all been put to rest.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's a legitimate thing to say.
No, and I agree with you, but I think the telephone game, actually, when you understand the fact that the Bible's not a translation of a translation of a translation, and on and on and on, that they actually go back to, copied manuscripts to translate. In other words, they're translating from effectively all the same manuscripts. But that's not the point. Is that if you can't get the same message in a room, how do you get the same message from about 40 different authors over, a 1,500 or more year period, keeping the nature of God the same, and the acts of God are aligned with his character and the commands of God, and they all harmonize. In other words, there's a harmony there and a coordination that is not possible in one room playing the telephone game. So how do you do it? So the telephone game demonstrates the fact the other way, that actually it has to be a miracle of God that the Bible passed on all these connective prophecies down through the years in a way that made them so cohesive and tied together in this unbroken chain, so that you can look back, and again, considering Christ, you have, he's anticipated, he's validated by miracles, and then he's confirmed by what he does, because the prophecy said he's going to do this, and this is who he is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I know what you mean.
Yeah. So, that's a miracle. Let's face it. I can't get everybody in a church to agree on anything. Never mind, writers of the Bible.
Yeah.
And they didn't. Yeah. Most of them didn't know each other.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. I mean, these guys are separated by many years in a lot of cases, and they had no motivation to support the previous story of another one or to depict God in the same way. That's not human nature. But the fact that we have the same God throughout and the same theme progressing and moving through all these years, it just doesn't happen, Scott. It can't happen, and that's just miraculous. That in itself is a biblical miracle that this happened, and we have verification of it. It's not just somebody says it's right there. We have ancient documents that support other documents that were found later, and that they match up. So it's the Bible is what it is. You can deny it if you want. You're free to do that, but the evidence shows otherwise. That it's an incredible, miraculous work.
So, like that PATHS acronym that we've talked about, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
did the video and had a discussion on that. No matter how you draw the perspective lines, whether it's predictive prophecy or archaeological discoveries, the the transmission of documents, the historicity of those documents, or the secular witnesses that testify to the same thing as like the New Testament and really of the Old Testament too, these sources outside the Bible, then no matter how the perspective lines are drawn, they all keep saying the exact same thing. Everything
yeah,
lines up, everything interconnects in a way that it is not. You couldn't make that happen if you tried. Like if you had prophets write and say, okay, listen, we had some other prophets write, make sure you don't deviate from that. But yet, again, that's the value of going through the Bible, because as you learn the books, you realize that like these guys are answering situations. They're not writing in respect to other writers. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
They may be interpreting the law, for example, and saying you're breaking the Mosaic law to Israel. You're in violation of the covenant that you're under with God in the Old Testament. So the prophets will take what is written in the first 5 books and then say, this is the covenant that you're under. This is why you're being judged, because you're deviating from it and you're rebelling against the Mosaic covenant. But
yeah,
but what they're not doing is saying, Amos isn't saying, oh, hold on, I got to find out what Isaiah wrote because
yeah.
I don't want to be out of line with it. Like none of them are doing that, because they're
No,
all writing specifically for their own situations. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
Now, once you go through it and you discover the book in context, you sit there and you go, oh, this is unbelievable. Because you realize like this is a unique individual eyewitness account taking the same. And again, we have to ask the question, why are they all in agreement that what Moses wrote, that's not only true, but that's given to them as a covenant that they need to keep and a truth that they need to continue to present to Israel. And the reason is because Moses was called by God and he was validated with the miracles, and then God would actually confirm what he was going to do and then continue to validate him not only with the miracles, the miraculous stuff that he claimed happened at the burning bush. Then he gets to Egypt, and then the anticipation of what Pharaoh's going to do, and then he goes and does it, and then you get the 10 plagues, and then he's in the wilderness, and then there's the miracles in the wilderness. It's like and you have millions of eyewitnesses of the Jews watching this stuff happen. I mean,
yeah,
think about it. They come out of Egypt, and they're at Mount Sinai, and you got this lightning and thunder and everything, and Moses is going to go up there, and and so in Exodus 19, you know, God says, do you want to obey my law? And they said, oh, absolutely. Everything that the Lord says we'll do. Okay, so they agree to this covenant. Moses goes up, gets the 10 Commandments. He hasn't even come down yet, and they're breaking them. All right?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
and again, God, Moses intercedes. God shows mercy. He forgives. They move on. And this is kind of a reoccurring thing over and over and over. But each time there's a miraculous aspect with Moses. I mean, the ground opened up when he come down, and the golden calf incident and everything. The ground opened up with Korah, his own sister Miriam. Before that, in Numbers 11, her and Aaron, because they're older than Moses, get the older sibling thing going there. And it's like, hey, who does he think he is? And it's like, and who do you think you are marrying this Ethiopian woman and blah, blah, blah. And so God made Miriam leprous. So the whole nation, 2 or 3 million people had to wait for Miriam for a week because though Moses interceded for her and then God healed her, she had to go through the cleanliness process, so everybody's got to wait for Miriam. So you keep like over and over and over. Do you know what I mean? It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know? And so it's not like you can just chalk that up to some mythical story. These are the events that actually happen, and archaeology has told us that this has happened, as well as the fact that the events recorded in the different prophets align with secular history, the things that we've discovered. So I mean, it's not, this isn't the Book of Mormon where Joseph Smith writes this book about the history of the United States prior to the American Indians that has no archaeological evidence, no physical evidence anywhere, no indications, nothing, zero. Kind of grabs it out of thin air.
Yeah. Who can deny it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I figured we'd take some time and, walk through and talk about some of that. Anything else on your mind up there at the Sugar Shack?
Just as a side note, you were talking about Moses and the people saying, yes, anything the Lord desires, that we will do. We're all on board. And it's just a depiction of human nature. And, it's funny how after all these thousands of years, people have not changed one bit. And I can see those people there saying this, whatever the Lord wants from us, we will give them, we will do. They meant it. When they said it, they meant it. However, a very short time later, they were going back on everything they said. And I just see that, that is so typical of today. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed at all.
Yeah. Hey,
human nature.
Yeah. No.
I find that.
Yeah, it doesn't change. And isn't it interesting because, hey, listen, there's been times in my own life I promised the Lord I would do things and I failed on it too. You know what I mean?
Sure. I oftentimes, like early on, and you're first reading the Bible, and the Israelites are being taken out of Egypt, and pillar of fire, pillar of dust, and they see all these miraculous things. The Red Sea is parted for them to cross, and they see all these things and experience all these things, the manna, all of this stuff, all these miracles, and yet then they would turn on God and complain. And I'm thinking, how in the world can they do this? As though if I were there, I certainly wouldn't do that. And I look and I find myself doing the same things, exactly the same things. That's human nature, I guess.
It definitely is. And what's interesting about it is, a lot of segments of the church today kind of, even though it says in Mark 16, these signs shall follow those who believe. You got believers, traveling everywhere following after signs, right? They hear some miracle happens somewhere, and then they shift and they all go here, and then it's happening there. Oh, and then you get this caravan of people following after different signs and wonders that supposedly, huh?
Signs and wonders. They want to see them.
Well, and the interesting thing is, even in the Bible, miracles can spark faith, but only the Word of God can build faith. In other words, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God, right? Romans 10. But, it never says faith comes by miracles. Miracles can certainly spark and at times be a response to what God is doing because people have faith, but they don't help you grow because they really are. There's something you can remember, but they're a momentary experience where the Word of God is God's voice. Paul calls it, it in 2 Timothy 3:16. He says, all Scripture is inspired or God-breathed, or literally God-breathed, right? Theonoustos is the Greek word. And then, so God is actually speaking. So what he says, it never ceases to not be true, especially as it's written, because he continues to be alive to carry it out. That's why it's powerful and alive and sharper than any two-edged sword, because if God says something, like when he spoke the universe into existence, the universe is still here. As long as God's going to be around, he'll maintain that, but the Word of God is the same. Like, his word will endure forever because he is going to be there forever. He makes sure that it happened because what he speaks is reality. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Very exciting stuff.
It is. It's mind-blowing stuff. It really is. And I hope that somebody would listen to this as maybe, on the fence or whatever. I plead with them to pick up the Bible and really dig in and make an attempt to get to know it. And for all those that criticize the Bible, anybody that really has criticism for the Bible, that's an indicator. That's the same thing as saying, I don't know the Bible, because you cannot criticize it, find fault with it, without knowing it.
Well, I would say,
if you know, say that.
Most people that I would say almost to the person that criticizes the Bible and says that it has contradictions, it's been disproven, this and that, or whatever, and or that it's immoral. It's just a demonstration of the fact that they're ignorant, because they actually don't understand it. And I've actually talked to people who have said, I've read through the Bible and they have all kinds of problems with it, but reading through it does not mean that they comprehended it.
No, it's not an article in Time magazine that you read and discard. It's something that you study. And the amazing thing about the Bible is, we've talked about that today. We've said how the Bible, it just in and of itself, it's just an incredible, miraculous work if you read it and try to understand it. You study it a little bit. It's just mind-blowing what happens. Now, like yourself, I've looked at other things outside of the Bible. I'm very much into creationism, and I look at origin of the universe. I've looked into that quite a bit. Origins of the universe, the cosmological argument, I've looked into that quite a bit. And these things, how they tie into the Bible, are quite amazing. I mean, it all fits as one thing. We look at origins of life. We look at evolution. Could it be? All of these things, they just tie in, and it's all within the Bible itself. All these things outside of the Bible, they tie into the Bible, and it's all one big logical story. It's just, it all fits. Everything fits. Science fits. And I know I've talked about this with you quite often, but the fact that some people say, they talk about the problem, the war between science and faith. That's ridiculous. There is no war between science and faith. Science confirms faith. It's there's no Christian that says stop doing science, it hurts my faith. No, there are many good, excellent Christian scientists out there that love science, and they interpret the science in a more logical way, and it confirms their faith. It confirms the Bible.
Yeah,
and
you're right. Science does not contradict the Bible, and it is not set against Christianity. And again, that's a straw man argument that atheists have used to.
It's manufactured. It doesn't exist. It's not an argument at all.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, they present it as one, and people, again, they're ignorant. They don't know any better. So they say, oh, well, I don't want to be a Christian because I don't want to be unscientific. And, it was kind of like, when I was in second or third grade and in the 60s, and they took prayer and Bible reading out of school, one day the teacher announced, she said, we're not going to pray anymore at the beginning of class. We'll have a moment of silence. And if you want to pray, you can pray to yourself. And we're not going to read the Bible anymore. And, we're only going to teach evolution. The indoctrination started then. And then we're not going to teach creation anymore. And, I was a quiet kid in school. I wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, so I didn't want to call attention to that. So, but one of the kids in class, raised his hand and said, well, what if you believe that God created the world? And because, again, in the 60s, everybody went to church, whether you were a real Christian or not, everybody went to church. And I had Jewish friends that went to synagogue, and, and the teacher's response was, well, if you want to be scientific, you'll believe in evolution. And if you want to be religious, you believe God created everything. Now, even as a little kid, that started spinning my head, and I was thinking, how can my believing that? I'll never forget the thought. How can my believing that, didn't it have to happen one way or the other? What does my believing it have to do with it?
Yeah.
Right? And never got that answer for the rest of my public school experience. And not that I asked it much, but it never really, the whole thing never really made much sense to me. Though I really didn't grow up as a Christian. I grew up Roman Catholic. And, I went to church, I think I got to a point as a teenager where I kind of stopped going. But the point is that I always kind of, it only made sense that God existed. And though, I didn't like the conviction of sin that came with knowing that. But the whole evolutionary story just never, just fundamentally, it's like, they used to talk in class about spontaneous generation, and they would talk about it as though life just spontaneously generated at some point. And it's like, well, how'd that happen? Because it was just rocks, right? And then all of a sudden, rocks come to life, Listen, I used to watch Lost in Space as a kid because not much was on TV. We only had a few channels like we were talking about. But, I mean, you're kind of in the realm of science fiction, you know what I mean? Yeah. Instead of science. Yeah. And so, but if God created the world, he created life, okay, that would match. If God created the world and the universe, then that means that, basically, he's powerful enough, everything's under his care. And if he created people, well, that's why my conscience bothers me, and it's guilty when I don't do something right. Well, I read that in Romans 2, I read in Romans 1 that the creation would point out the fact that God exists, and there's just no way to look at creation. There is no way, even if you could for table it at the point and say, all right, just putting spontaneous generation aside, are you going to try to tell me that all the relationships between all these different creatures on the earth and in the ocean and everything else that exists, like they just somehow evolved? I mean, honestly, Herb, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. My wife and I were watching this thing where they believe in evolution on television last night, and they do this thing now where they have under the water, they'll have like crabs and octopus and sharks and whales and all these different sea creatures that they make fake ones, and they put cameras in them so that they can actually get into close proximity to the same like creatures and watch them, where they wouldn't do the same thing around people. It's phenomenal, the things that they do. I said to my wife last night, we're watching it, I said, well, there you go. There's the marvel of evolution right there. Look at how they're interreacting. I wonder how many millions of years it took to figure out how to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
They wouldn't have survived. Do you know what I mean? It's just, oh my gosh. It's like now the people that are filming it, they do a great job. And I mean, the cinematography with it and the filming is just, it is phenomenal. It's class A. I mean, it's high def, the whole thing. But the commentary kills you. You almost have to shut the sound off because it's like, wow, you guys can really film great. But you are really the dumbest people on the planet. My wife says, well, they don't have the wisdom of God. And I say, well, yeah, that's really what it is.
Well, they appeal to people that don't have any knowledge of these things because they just brush over things. Like a living cell, all you need is you just need a cell membrane, which any lipids can form in a circular fashion. And all you need to do is just have some RNA material captured into that, and they can self-replicate, and there you go. They were just on the verge of discovering how life was formed 70 years ago. And today, they're just on the verge of discovering how life was formed.
Yeah. So you're sitting at the Sugar Shack, right? And
yeah,
you got some kind of distillery going on there making maple syrup, right?
Yeah, we like to call it maple syrup. Yeah.
Oh, are you kidding? It's the best. It's the best I've ever had. But anyways, watch now. You'll have people wanting to ship it, but anyways, so that. If you leave those maple trees alone long enough, are you going to get syrup?
I probably in a couple billion years. That's what they tell me. Just time, the answer.
Yeah, the squirrels will start making it, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, these things. When you look into the formation of a protein, time is an enemy. The things that they say, I mean, they talk about the warm little pond. The warm little pond breaks proteins down. If you have two amino acids bond, the water is going to destroy that bond. It's hydrolysis, and if you add water to it, the bond breaks apart. So, in a very short period of time. So getting two amino acids to stay together for any period of time is very hard to do. Getting a chain, well, you can forget it. So the whole thing is just ridiculous. Yet they continue on and proclaim they are on the verge. So whatever.
Well, it's like they talk about all the stuff that they teach, but yet they don't know anything about it. Like we were listening to that message that Chuck did,
Yeah.
So.
Well, hey, we got to, we'll plan something for the future. Maybe get into some of this stuff in a little bit more detail,
Yep. Well, we're coming to an hour anyways, but listen, I appreciate you taking time away from watching the fire burn at
Oh yeah,
the sugar
yeah.
shack. You know,
Dying down now. We got to look into collecting some more sap now.
how was the
Uh,
sap run today?
it wasn't very much at all. I only got 5 gallons because it didn't get cold last night. It
Oh,
stayed above freezing. So hopefully tonight will be a little different and we'll get some tomorrow.
all right.
But yeah, it
Well,
was great.
all right.
Always enjoy doing it.
So we hope that you enjoyed the conversation with Herb and I. Herb coming from the sugar shack up in Maine, just a little shack on his property where he's making probably the most delicious maple syrup anybody has ever had. But that's a side note. But anyways, until next time, we pray that God will bless you as you continue to study his word.